Welcome. We have kind of a bonus video here, although bonus usually implies something good, and these two movies are not good. But anyway, I found two movies that were done in 1970 that I couldn't get my hands on before. I've come into access to a bunch of really obscure movies from like basically a whole library of them. So I've found at least five or maybe more movies from 1970 that I couldn't find before. They're pretty obscure. The two here that we're going to talk about today are both by Andy Milligan. You may remember Andy Milligan, we talked about Guru the Mad Monk, and we talked about The Body Beneath earlier on in 1970. Both of those movies were horrible, and so are these two. So we'll quickly talk about them, just in the name of completion. I probably could have, bought these earlier, but I couldn't force myself to spend a single dollar on these movies. Anyway, the first one here is Torture Dungeon. These movies are so obscure, I'm not sure if I have all the info correct. I think this came out in January of 1970. And was produced actually in the end of 1969. This is a medieval story about it's about a royal family, and the king dies, and his half-brother is trying to take over, but really the king's brother would be the next in line for the throne. The king's brother is, as they say in the movie, a half-wit, and he can't even talk. Of course, it's a regular person playing a mentally disabled person in the movie, so that right there makes the movie pretty bad. The portrayal of the guy with a mental disability by today's standards would be pretty offensive, and he's not even the only character that has some kind of disability in the movie. Anyway, we're going to give this one a 3 out of 10. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it because the story is actually coherent. I don't think I could possibly ruin the movie for you because even talking about it makes it sound better than it actually is. So anyway, 3 out of 10 for this one. We are going to talk about another movie in a few minutes on the same video. There's no real point in turning it off because nothing's going to get ruined for you. Anyway, the half-brother wants to be the heir. However, the half-brother is sterile. Okay, so he needs his half-brother who's mentally disabled to have a kid, so that way the bloodline can be continued, but after he has a kid, which would be his nephew, he wants to take over. So what he does is he gets some, moderately attractive peasant girl to become the queen, and they get married. In the meantime, he also has this servant that's a hunchback. Andy Milligan loves hunchbacks, by the way. There's a hunchback in Guru the Mad Monk, and I forget if I think there might have been one in The Body Beneath too. So he loves hunchbacks. Anyway, the hunchback is on the poster here. That's him. Although you can't tell because he's standing against the wall, so you can't see his hunch. Anyway, the reason why this gets a 3 out of 10 and not a 1 out of 10 is because there are a few parts of it that are kind of interesting. Like the story itself is actually fine, but of course the acting is poor, the execution is poor, the cinematography is just horrible. Anyway, the story is all right. The other piece that's kind of interesting is the fact that the evil half-brother has this very progressive sexual ideas. He calls himself a trisexual in that he will try anything, including having sex with his male hunchback servant, even though he says he's not gay. He also has a wife who he forces to have a threesome with him and the hunchback. And even though that's ridiculous, the fact that they put it in a movie in 1970 is I feel slightly important. Because you really didn't have anything like that, as far as I know, in anything before. I mean, it's pretty depraved. There's also incest in the movie. Woman gets pregnant. I think it's the woman's sister becomes pregnant. I said that wrong. The king's sister becomes pregnant by the king. And that is not touched upon very much in the movie, but it is mentioned. There's also a fair amount of gore in this movie. There are 2 pitchfork kills. They both actually look good too. Like, it's surprising because so much is bad in this movie, but the pitchfork kills were both good. The hunchback gets the pitchfork stuck in his hump and he starts spitting up blood everywhere. Also, a guy who is not a vampire, actually it's the mentally disabled king, gets a stake through the heart, even though there's nothing about vampirism in this movie, but someone kills him by sticking a stake through his heart. Also, this woman on the front here is the main woman's father's, like, maid or something. And she has this weird disfigured face, and they did a good job with the disfigurement makeup, because she's not really disfigured, of course. It's makeup. Some of the actors were okay. Some of them were really bad. But overall, I actually was able to make it through to the end of the movie, so that's saying something. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10, maybe a high 3 out of 10, maybe even a 4 out of 10. Oh, but the reason why I really cannot give it a 4, which is already a low score, is because why is it called Torture Dungeon? Well, there is a dungeon in the basement of, like, whatever, the castle, I guess. Not that there are any exterior shots of the castle, of course. The whole thing was filmed in a, like, Staten Island house or apartment or something like that. But there is a dungeon. There is one scene where they go down to the dungeon and there are a couple people being tortured in there. However, as if it's not bad enough to name the entire movie after one scene, you also have a guy hanging by his hands, I think, or wrists, and they say that his legs have been cut off, and there is very clearly just a thin black cloth hanging from his waist. And you can see from his hip down to his knee on one of his legs. Like, the cloth doesn't even cover his entire legs. They said his legs have been cut off. Also, the main half-brother antagonist, who's kind of gets more screen time than anyone else in this movie, like, mentions that he only has one hand. And if he didn't mention that, you would never notice. Like, you never see his stump in the shot. And it's very clear that he has, like, a full arm. He says, I think the quote is, "I wish I had 2 hands, but my one arm is stronger than any other man's arm in the entire kingdom." I think he says that. But, like, he has 2 arms. You can see the other arm. You don't see his other hand. But, I don't know. Obviously, very poorly done. But what do you expect? It's Andy Milligan. Okay? Honestly, out of the 4 Andy Milligan movies I've forced myself to watch, I think this is probably the best one out of 4. Okay, now we got to talk about Bloodthirsty Butchers. This video is long enough where I could have given Torture Dungeon its own video, but Bloodthirsty Butchers isn't worth its own video at all. Bloodthirsty Butchers gets a 1 out of 10. Here's why. Horrible acting, horrible effects, horrible editing. It's the choppiest editing job I've ever seen. Absolutely horrible, like, scenes end sometimes too early, sometimes too late. Okay? The cinematography is absolutely horrible. There are multiple scenes where people are talking and the camera is aimed too high. So you only see them from the chin up and then you see, like, wall above them. I don't understand why. Okay? This movie, it's debated, apparently, according to the internet, if this movie was shot in London or if it was shot in New York City. It takes place in London, and some of the characters have English accents, or I guess London accents specifically, and some of them don't. So did Andy Milligan bring some of his friends over to London and make them, or did he shoot this in the United States and get some of the actors to speak in fake London accents? If you look at some reviews, people will make note of the horrible accents, and I can't tell if it is English people that can't act or if it is American people that can't do an English accent. It could be either one. Okay. The music sounds like discarded Walt Disney animated music. It doesn't fit at all. Actually, the other movie has basically what you would think of as like Looney Tunes style music. Like, it's ridiculous. Okay. In this one, there is, I kid you not, okay, someone gets slapped across the face and they know it's coming, and a full second before the person gets slapped, they flinch. So that is the level of acting you're dealing with here. Also, in the other movie, there's some slapping, and the person who needs to slap the other person hesitates because you can see that they're worried that they're going to hurt the other person, and then they really slap them. So these movies are absolute garbage. I know there are people that like garbage. Okay, I know there are people that like Andy Milligan, but from an objective standpoint, they're probably some of the worst movies in existence. And in my opinion, from a subjective standpoint, they are probably some of the worst movies in existence. Okay, I probably could have made this 2 videos, but oh well. Andy Milligan, 4 horror films in 1970, 5 films in 1970. The other one's not horror. None in 1971, I don't think. Or maybe he made one that wasn't horror. So luckily, I don't have to watch another Andy Milligan film until we get to 1972, in which he does, I didn't memorize the title because it's very long, but something like The Rats Are Coming, the Werewolves Are Here. Something like that, which is actually a pretty intriguing title. So by the time 1972 comes around, I'll watch that. All right. Anyway, that's it for this like midweek episode. We'll probably do another 71 episode on the weekend and another 70 episode in the next midweek. I think that's the plan. All right. See you later.